I knew I wouldn't survive if I stayed.
What are the early signs of the wrong kind of love?
There are three things I would have liked to have known. And the first thing is these kind of people, they know how to find easy prey. The second thing is they also know how to hook you and rein you in. And the last part I would have liked to have known is how much of myself I ended up compromising in the relationship.
What is the difference between belonging somewhere and calling that home and just staying somewhere and calling that home?
It may be hard to understand until you have experienced it, but that's what home is. Really feeling good in your own skin, knowing that you're connected to something much bigger than your image.
My guest today is Anette Nilsson, the author of So Happy, a Viking woman's long road home. A raw, deeply honest memoir about trauma, illness, reinvention, and returning to oneself after losing all. Welcome to Compassiviste Dialogues. I'm your host, Ali Horiat. My goal in this program is to educate our audience about various global issues and how we can help. My guest today is Anette Nilsson, the author of So Happy, a Viking woman's long road home. A raw, deeply honest memoir about trauma, illness, reinvention, and returning to oneself after losing all. Born in Denmark, educated in Toronto, like myself, and shaped by years in New York, kind of like myself, Annette lives a life defined by movement, also recently like myself, across continents, relationships, ambitions, and identities. Her book chronicles her fast descent into a toxic marriage, the unraveling of her physical health, and the painful excavation of hidden family wounds she's never been allowed to name, all while finding the courage to heal herself from the inside out. Before Soul Happy, she wrote children's fiction, co-founded a tech consulting firm, nothing that I could do, taught English and IT, and built a life across North America and Europe. Today, she divides her time between Denmark and New York, writing stories that bridge the soul, the body, and the truth we spend our lives trying to reclaim. Hello, Annette, and welcome to Compassiviste Dialogues.
Hi, Ali. Thank you for having me here. Really, truly, I'm very honored to be here.
Oh,
and
you're welcome.
Just a small note of correction. I was actually born in Canada, but raised in Denmark.
Ooh, the other way around? Okay, sorry. It came to me that way. Okay, born in Canada, born in Toronto?
Born in Toronto, and then by Danish parents, and then raised in Denmark.
Okay, there we go. And then did you ever come back to Toronto?
Yeah. Then I went back for schooling. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So there is another connection there. Let's start there. Soul Happy begins with the decision to leave Denmark and I guess return to Toronto because you were born there, full of ambition, curiosity, and independence. Looking back, what was the inner force driving little Annette at the time, to understand your vulnerabilities and to kind of drive you to start this new path?
So as mentioned, I was born in Canada but raised in Denmark. And Canada played a tremendous role in my childhood. It sounds crazy, but since the age of 3, I knew that I wanted to go back to Canada and live there. And it was a dream, but I believed in this with such an absoluteness that I now know when you have a dream and it's so it takes up so much space that there's no fear or wavering, no doubt, then you're connected to your soul's plan. So at a young age, I knew that this is where I was going to go as soon as I could, as soon as I graduated high school. And so that was definitely a force driving me. And because at that time it was unusual for someone from Northern Europe to move to Canada or North America. And I was also very ambitious. So as I became a teenager, I added to that dream. I knew I wanted to go to Canada to study and become a journalist. And it was just the way it was going to be. And, I did leave at 18. So I did initiate that dream. But there was also an outer force driving me. I was also escaping Denmark, because Denmark in the 70s and 80s, when I grew up, was socialist, very different from today. And back then the world was divided into distinct continents and countries. North America was this fabled land. Once in a while we'd get some pop culture, like a movie or, a song, right. But it was very different. So I saw it as a place where my dreams could unfold, and where, like in northern Denmark, there was no room for ambition or drive. In fact, that was cut down. That was my experience. You was just supposed to be like everybody else, and there was a set path. So those were the forces driving me. And then I know you asked about vulnerability. I was this gung-ho young woman, didn't have any deficits, didn't have any weaknesses. She thought she was just going for her dream. But when I came to Toronto, it didn't take that long before something blindsided me. And back then we didn't talk about traumas, mental health, and all those things that are on the table today. But it turned out that I had a lot of emotional baggage, a lot of traumas in my knapsack. And I didn't know that. And once it reared its head, I didn't know how to deal with it, because this was something I had not taken into consideration.
And you arrive, and as in your book, essentially a relationship begins with a charismatic but volatile man whose influence slowly unraveled your sense of self. I know many people, especially women, watching, listening here, are going to recognize this pattern, because a lot of people may connect with you here and what you're saying. What are the early signs of the wrong kind of love that maybe someone like you, back then would have wished to have a little pamphlet coming off the plane saying, read this before you enter the city or something?
Some like to have known a few things. And let's call, I married a toxic person, and let's just call that type of person narcissistic. When I, married him, narcissism it wasn't in my awareness. It wasn't in the public awareness. So,
and perhaps it was even glamorized, because that was around the time American Psycho came out as a film, and it was it was hot to be that person, Right. So a lot of issues that we're dealing with today, like you said, that didn't exist back then, or we didn't know how to channel them, and they existed. We glamorized a lot of them because we didn't know how to deal with them, and so that narcissistic man back then was the macho, powerful, strong, attractive man that a lot of people didn't know how to deal with or relate to or anything like that.
And that was exactly what I was attracted to. He was bigger than life when I met him. But quickly, there are three things I would have liked to have known. And the first thing is, these kind of people know how to find easy prey. People like myself back then. And by that, I mean, easy prey is someone who is very comfortable with not having needs or not attending to their own needs, but comfortable with servicing others. Someone who's compassionate about everybody but themselves. That was me. And the second thing is, they also know how to hook you and rein you in. And I'll give you an illustration to get this point across. So we met when I was studying in Toronto, and I had gone home to Denmark for a vacation, and I met him there. And he lived in New York. So as soon as I returned to Toronto, I went down to see him, and that was essentially our first dating. And I recall sitting in his apartment, and he was bragging and boasting and going on about, he was going helicopter skiing in the Rocky Mountains, very, very cocky, which was the antithesis to Danish modesty, at least as expressed back then. And it was a lucid thought just struck me, like, this guy's a jerk. What am I doing here? But the thought hadn't even left my mind before on a dime, he switched. He turned off the bragging, and then he turned his attention to me, and he transformed into the person I had fallen for. And then, I wasn't going to leave, because here was this guy, this wonderful guy. And this is what they do. They have this exceptional sense for knowing when they're losing the grip on you. And then they switch on the charm. And
maneuvering the narrative, essentially.
Pardon me?
They maneuver the narrative. They know when to pull the strings. Yeah.
Yeah. And they know, so when it's good with, when the relationship works with a narcissist, it's magical. And that's, I think, why a lot of people stay in a relationship like that. But he would throw me these crumbs every so often, but it was enough for me to stay. Because when I was not tending to my own needs, and then it was, my God, it was so wonderful. Because, narcissists basically don't have a sense of themselves, so they can turn into anything, and they're very good at it. And that's how they fool you. And the last part I would have liked to have known is how much of myself I ended up compromising in the relationship. And from that, a lot of shame grew. And again, an example, I had always been very opposed to drugs and drug users. With a lot of young arrogance, I looked down on them, and I had always stayed clear of it. But then I met Calvin, and very quickly I learned that he did drugs, and I accepted that because he made it seem so cool. And pretty soon I was doing drugs along with him. And in doing so, I compromised a fundamental part of myself. And so much shame grew from that. So I started hiding in the relationship. So friends and family, even if they had caught on, didn't have a chance to reach me because I was ashamed of myself. So those are the three things I would have liked to have known. And thankfully, there's a lot more, it's mainstream now, narcissism. We talk about it. So I'm hoping a lot of people will, wise up faster. But I actually don't fully agree with you, Ali, when you say women recognize this pattern. They do if they have survived and come out of a relationship. But it's part of.
That's exactly what I meant. I meant people who've experienced it. Yeah, but unfortunately, it's something it's a poison you have to taste to learn about.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you have to drown repeatedly even before you own up.
Yeah.
But what I also want to say is, and this could be understood the wrong way, is don't blame the narcissist. And I'm not saying this to protect the narcissist, not at all. I'm saying this to help you and whoever is in a narcissistic relationship. Because what I discovered is, I thought once I'm divorced, everything, I'm going to get happy and be happy and all that. That didn't happen because I continued to attract narcissistic people in potential dating material and friends. And that's when I realized, okay, there's something in me that has this sensitivity, and I need to fix that. So when I say don't blame the narcissist, I'm actually saying take your power back, because this is how you're going to protect yourself from future relationships, is by healing the part of you that made you enter this relationship.
Part of your story, your book, and the way you're sharing it with the world, and the fact that your story is very connecting in the sense that there are a lot of cases like yourself, similar to yourself in the world, is great. And we're going to go on a quick tangent here. I find today narcissism has kind of changed from you even having to have that much skill that the narcissist used to have in the 80s or the 90s, for example, to be so aware, so intelligent, be able to change the narrative, be able to hook the person in and all of that, to social media and the public making the narcissism fine for you in the sense that one of the reasons why I left the life that I had, I was that high flying guy in New York, Toronto circles, young, super successful with all the toys and the flashings that, people would only see today in social media. Back then, we didn't have that kind of social media that you became. Like if I was living my life 25 years ago today or 20 years ago today, I would probably have a few million followers just going to my garage in the morning, And so today, unfortunately, that exact scene of me walking into my garage saying, which car do I pick to go to work in, is the narcissism that I don't need to do anything about anymore. I don't need to find a girl, somehow trick her into, by accident, seeing me coming out of my Rolls Royce so that she's already impressed, right? I had to do that in the early 2000s. You had to kind of park in a semi-discreet way that you're not trying to show off your car, but you are showing off your car. You're making sure that the right target is seeing that you got out of this car. You're doing all of these narcissistic behaviors. Today, I wouldn't need to do that. I just need to post on my social media that I'm going home from the gym and I just happen to be in a Rolls Royce. You get flooded. Yeah, you have a lineup outside your door. You see what I mean? So unfortunately, today, you don't need to be a narcissist anymore because narcissism itself and that whole, stream of it, of not caring, not having a heart about anything, not even being a person. One of the reasons, again, I left my world was there came a time where I was unhappy with the life that I was living. I had everything. Everybody was kind of envious of my life, from people I dated to the money I had to everything. And I was not happy in those. So I knew something's wrong here. I'm pleasing everybody else. I'm not pleasing myself. I'm not happy with the girl I'm dating. I'm not happy with the car I'm driving. It actually gives me a backache to get into it and get out of it. But, I drive it and I can't even see outside my rear view, mirror, nothing. But I drive it and in the hardest parking spots and everything else because of the people. It's not for me. If it was for me, I would have loved to be in a comfortable SUV. Because you can even go up the curb and come back down and park, and it's not a problem. With this car, it's like, oh my God. So nothing was comfortable in my life, and even like that superficial dating scene and every time having to go to these, fancy places to be seen and these galas and events and all, it was just not me anymore. But now, pushing that out for, coming to 10 years now, I'm looking at the world and I'm thinking, what used to be something you had to work on and publish and essentially put out this movie of yourself to present to the world is now being done for you. You download Instagram and then you just show the camera around your house and boom, there's the effort. And there's 6 billion people lined up to watch that, because when you look at the most followed influential people of our world, it's not the person who could be Buddha today. It's not the person who would be Jesus today. It's not it's not the Marie Curie. It's none of these people. It's not. It is exactly the narcissist. We are putting them on a pedestal like you are our God. And so,
yeah, I had a conversation with a young person just the other day, and they were really having a hard time with a lot of their peers are narcissistic or have narcissistic tendencies. And we were discussing why that is. And we came to the conclusion that it's social media and maybe parenting skills, helicopter parenting, or, parents don't want to set ground rules because it's sometimes too hard. So not giving them guidelines and clear guidelines produces narcissistic kids. And yet I don't want to call everybody a narcissist, but social media definitely has created more of this.
Yes. And I like that you said, be more cautious than always playing victim, in a sense, because there are places where you shouldn't be more cautious. So, for whether in Denmark or Toronto or Copenhagen, Toronto, New York, anywhere in the world, if you're walking down the street as a woman, nobody in the world can tell me that you should be more cautious in the sense of not getting attacked or anything like that, right? Because it should be your right to be safe. And when that happens, it's society that is lost as a whole. It's not that woman who's lost. So there are times and places that I think it's our community that should be ashamed of an act that happens. But there are times and places where, like you said, like you were pointing to, you put yourself in that situation. So many people come into that relationship because so much is promised, so much is shown, so much is, like you said, when it works, it's magic, and that magic is showing for 10 seconds, and it's like a drug. It's exactly like a drug. It's like the best thing, and it's not just money. I mean, it could be physical intimacy, it could be money, it could be many different things. It could just be the person knows how to say the right things, or
And
I don't
actually,
know.
they're very good at faking connection. So you may be a
Yes.
wholesome person looking for connection, and they're so good at faking it.
That's what I mean. It's not necessarily just the person with money who's a narcissist. I mean, they could know that you're into music. Suddenly, they make music. Suddenly, they play the guitar. Suddenly, they're best friends with your favorite artist or something. But it'll take you 5 years to ever get to meet them because this weekend he was busy. Next weekend he has this. Whatever happens. But then you're there for all this time, not knowing who you're with. So you got to be a little more cautious, especially in today's world where everything is kind of like open and wide, and we've cracked those problems open. Like you said, when you were 18, narcissism was a hard word to say. Nobody could even probably, not many people could spell it.
I don't even think it was a concept really,
No.
unless you were a researcher, because when I
Mhm.
started writing my book in '07, my mom also had these tendencies. I didn't have a word for what I had been through. It took me 4 years to find a book on it. So it's a fairly new phenomenon that we actually are discussing this.
Mm-hmm. But now it's kind of like, you should be more cautious because this is one of those places where you're stepping into it. You're not forced into it. You're not kidnapped into it. It's not a societal issue to protect you. It's first your own issue to protect yourself against this kind of scenario. It's kind of like when people, somebody scams them like a tourist, you go to a new country or something and you give them a $50 bill and they give you, something fake money or something back that's not the right amount or something. It's your fault. It's part of tourism, what are you going to do? But you try to not put yourself in those situations. You try to be more cautious when you're handing money and all that. Same thing with relationships. Like, it's not that the person kidnapped you and said, you have to marry me, otherwise I'm going to chop your neck off. And you're like, okay, fine, put the ring on, it's more like you were playing along with this. I mean, the whole, a lot of people, the relationship grows with narcissists. I mean, I've had friends, uh, because of the life I've lived, a lot of people around me were narcissistic, heavily narcissistic. And so I would generally see at home, people sitting there talking about, oh, how awful the relationship is. This is it. They're going to quit. They're never, they're going to walk away. They're going to go live with their mom for a while, or they're renting a flat and all this stuff. 10 days later, I see them at an event with that guy that they were leaving, right? And I'm looking like, you were at my house talking to this other person, crying and looking at homes together online and all, like you were really there. You were talking to agents, moving out and everything. You're in love. You're in love. You're engaged. Sometimes I'd see them and like, oh my God, we got engaged. And I couldn't say anything in public. I'm just staring at them in shock, right?
Well,
And
that's
slowly
why.
I learned. Yeah, slowly I learned. I learned the charm, the charisma, the knowledge of how to rein the person back in. Like it's an art.
Yeah, and they're so good at it. So what I have learned is that I now know the signs to look out for, and even still I can get fooled because some of them only reveal their true character, 5 years down the road. I've
Mm.
had a couple of friends who it took years for them to reveal their true character, but now I have changed because now I cut them out of my life immediately. Once I discovered that that's who they are, I cut them out. So yeah, we can do as much as possible to protect us, but really the biggest thing you can do is when you realize that's who they are, cut them out. If,
Right.
sometimes in a family constellation, you can't cut them out, but you can distance yourself.
Now I want to switch from the narcissism part and your entry into that relationship to your physical health, because you have that going on and you have this collapse, this physical collapse that happens. Um, and it happens, I think, also because the body's breaking under all that emotional suppression and the emotional collapse that's causing um, the physical sometimes. How did your illness force you to confront family secrets, buried trauma, maybe some of you saying hiding yourself, and then that whole confrontation, return, I think it's somehow a beginning of a healing, even if we don't know that we are
Yes.
doing that. Sometimes we do it out of like this, okay, I can't anymore. And then we just let it out. And then that becomes the start of the healing. But we don't know because we're waiting for the healing to happen through a process that is kind of presented or doctored or something. But we don't know this was the beginning. So how did that journey reveal to you about, the connection between truth and healing for you as you went through
Yeah.
it?
So when what you're saying is when we were falling apart, we're actually falling into place, even though it doesn't feel that way.
A better way of
So,
saying it, yes.
so when I became ill while I was in the marriage, and I was about 30 years old, and that was one of the wake up calls. I knew I wouldn't survive if I stayed. But when I first got sick, I didn't intend to pull out family secrets and make everybody sick. That in no way did that ever enter my mind. I was simply a young person who got sick. And at first I thought, I've always been very resourceful. I thought, okay, I'm going to fix this. I'm going to, it's like a test I study for. Let me check that off pretty quickly. But that didn't happen. My body quickly spun out of control. I had received a Crohn's diagnosis, and Crohn's is a bowel disorder. And I had a very severe case of it. And my body, I was intractable to medicine, meaning in my case, medicine didn't work. Rarely. If anything, it made my symptoms worse or gave me new symptoms. So I was forced to look somewhere else in order to survive. So I never intended to look at, spirituality, but this was where I ended up looking because medicine couldn't help me. The traditional protocols couldn't help me. And what I learned quickly is that when you have been exposed to traumas and secret keeping and that sort of thing, that doesn't go away. It stays in your system like a bad infection. And today it's even mainstream knowledge. I think there's a saying, the issue's in your tissue. And I discovered that right away, that what looks like a physical symptom or ailment, actually it has a spiritual, emotional component.
Mm-hmm.
And I also discovered you have to be truthful if you want to heal that, the hidden trauma or whatever wound it is. Because if you're not truthful about the circumstances, how can you ever heal it? And I have an example to sort of illustrate what I mean. So I received the Crohn's diagnosis, and very quickly I also received a rheumatoid arthritis diagnosis. And I was 32 years old, and my hands and feet were crippled. And I was alone with my toddler, and I couldn't even buckle her in a car seat. So it was not a good situation. And the doc said, immunosuppressant drugs for life. And I'm like, nah, doesn't feel so good. So I looked at what rheumatoid arthritis is, from a spiritual perspective, and it's fire. It's an inflammation, and that's tied to anger. So I changed my diet. I went on acid alkaline diet, anti-inflammatory, and I started working on my anger. It took a lot of work, but within a year and a half, that diagnosis disappeared. So this is an example of, I had to look at the anger and why I was angry, but most of all, I had to release it. Now, if I hadn't done that, I probably wouldn't be here. My hands would be crippled still. So truth heals. That's, and there's a connection between, your physical symptoms and illness and something that's amiss in you, spiritually or emotionally.
And you know what? The fact that it's more now, but to think of you back then, you're 30, 32 years old, and to go out there and say, I don't care what the doctor said, let me figure this out, and to actually do the research and do the science and kind of go into different fields and trust it and try to do that and heal yourself is also something that more people need to do, because I find, whether you call it holistic, spiritual, whatever you want to call it, alternative, it's not. It's science. It's still science. It's one kind of science. You have one kind that is, pharma. You have one kind that is here, one kind that's there, but it's still science because it works. People need to do that. People need to be a little more open-minded into the ways that the root causes of the problems can be explained, so that they can find natural pathways through those root causes. And I love that you brought that example and shared that part of your life, because you're right. It's inflammation, it's fire, it's anger, it's all connected to that heat. And you learned how to manage the boiling point. And so that management essentially calmed the inflammation. And, one thing leads to another, and it starts working. And it only happens because you know what it is. A lot of people, you ask them, what is this pill you're taking? Or it's for my this and that. And you're like, what is that? I don't know. It's something I have. The doctor told me I have. They still don't know what they have. Like, you have it in your body and you don't know what it is. You just know that the doctor told you that you have it. I'm not telling you don't trust the doctor, but at least ask the doctor, what is it? So that you have some kind of recollection and an idea of what you're going through or what your body's dealing with. So maybe you can help. So that part of your story is really important too. The actual daring to do that.
I have done this many times. I have beaten diagnoses many times, and it's the same approach. Find out what it's about, and I've just done it many times.
You should definitely share that with the world. You should definitely put that on your website. If you are diagnosed, do A, B, C, D, because I have done this for myself. Here are the 5 times that I've been through it and how I've healed. I mean, that itself is case study, right? That itself is like, okay, I'm going to follow Annette's system and do this.
But, and I'm just one person, but now it's actually mainstream. So I found out how to heal various diagnoses. And then about 4 years ago, I ran into this book by a Harvard psychiatrist called Dr. Jeff Rediger. He wanted to, he'd been to many conferences, and he said when he met doctors, every doctor who has a practice has seen people who have spontaneously healed. So he wanted to investigate that, and he did it with all the science and tests behind him. So he actually discovered 4 pillars to healing. Also, like healing people that had a brain tumor had 2 weeks to go, healing spontaneously. And the 4 pillars that he came up with is essentially what I have been working on in my healing journey. So here's a doctor with a credible doctor with lots of cases. I'm not the only case. There's plenty of them. And as he
Right.
says, a
Yeah.
doc knows people in their practice, but they're afraid of being ridiculed by their peers, and that's
Yes.
why they don't
Yes.
mention it.
Yes. A lot of it is unfortunately that, because I don't even speak about it, but I have witnessed more than one person being healed of cancer through an alternative energy focused method of kind of healing that cancer, that exactly like you said, people who had been given uh, no more treatment. Like, there's no point putting you through chemo and stuff. It's just going to hurt. It's not worth it. It's not going to heal you. You only have 3 months. Go on a cruise, spend time with your family, enjoy your life. And here's
And
some
exactly
real,
when they do that surrendering, that's one
yeah,
of the pillars. When they start enjoying their life and go on the cruise, that's one of the things you need to do.
yeah. And people who were at that stage came back to the same doctor about 6 to 9 months later, and they said, can we do another testing? And they did the testing, and in one case I remember, because I personally was present for that, the doctor said there must have been a mistake in the file that was sent in under your name back then, because this is medically impossible. In medicine, this is impossible that this happened. So there's no way we can explain this. The only explanation is there must have been a mistake. We're going to look into it. And literally a whole year of, we're going to look into it and yada yada yada, nothing happened. They couldn't come up with any, but that doctor refused to accept that it is possible that this person did, like, I don't know. To me, it's like you said, one part of it is, they don't want to be ridiculed, but the other part is the dogmatic doctor who does the ridiculing. The dogma is insane. It's just like religion. It's so dogmatic that you just can't hear it, you can't accept it. It's just the way it is. Otherwise, it'll just unravel your whole world. Like, you went to school for 20 years, and now here comes somebody says, no, you got to go here. And it's like, no, I did too much to get here.
Now, there's also another doctor, Dr. Jill Carnahan, who has been
Mhm,
through her own health, breast cancer, mold,
mhm.
etc. And in her book, it's called Unexpected. She
Yes.
says that, she's on the same, she agrees with Dr. Rediger that you certainly can heal things that are considered incurable. And she
Mhm.
says what's considered incurable is just there's no pill for it. It doesn't mean that it's not curable. It just means that there's no
Yes,
medication for it.
exactly. There's no pharmaceutical product that we can sell you for it. That's what it really means. Now, there is also a part that, reading your story and learning a little about you, and having friends from Denmark and from the rest of your part of the world, there is this Viking resilience that comes up. And different cultures have different ways of adapting or being resilient or fighting back or growing or evolving and all of those things. Um, but in your case, your identity kind of shaped your ideas of um, the silence itself, because I know some, like you said, growing up, Denmark was very socialist and whatnot, but regardless of that, Scandinavian people historically have been very quiet, kind of, suppressed. You don't speak publicly about things, and you keep whatever happens behind your doors, and all of that. So, you know, your identity comes from a lot of that, a lot of the silence, a lot of the, how strength is defined in your culture and how you survive in your culture. So how did living in Toronto, New York, Denmark, around Copenhagen and everything, how did all of this influence and shape you so that you're here now?
Yeah.
What
So
did you have to break through?
the Viking resilience, the Viking is theme in my book, and I never intended for it. It just came out. And when it came out, I said, okay, let me see where it takes me. And then at the end, I saw that it was actually a definite thread. And I never intended for it because I haven't ever had an interest in Viking culture. I've studied Greek mythology.
Mm.
It actually, I think it's one of the pillars upholding the book. It came out nicely. So that shows you how, we get influenced by our culture even when we think we aren't. But since we're talking about Viking resilience, I like to define it the way I experienced it because it helped me survive. So the Vikings were great warriors and great at accepting their fate. If they went into a battle, they accepted whatever would happen would happen. And in that acceptance is very important because you're not wasting energy on an internal struggle like, am I going to survive? Or all that is gone. So you can just focus on the trial ahead of you. And that's what I did. I had a lot of physical deals that I had to face, and I used that same method. And then I added this layer of numbness, which is great for surviving, which worked in the Viking era, but it doesn't help you thrive. And this is what I discovered on my journey, that you really need compassion and self-compassion to heal and to thrive. And there is no room for that with the Viking stoicism. And I still see it in the older generation and in part of society in Denmark. But I will say that the younger generation, they don't really suffer from it.
No, not at all. Not one bit. Which is great. Which is great.
Yeah, right.
I'm not mocking them. I love it. I love that they don't do that because yeah. No, I was just gonna say, I love that because it kills. I like being stoic, but not in that way. There's different ways of being stoic, right? There's productive ways of being stoic. This is not a productive stoicism that people should like champion, and
Dysfunctional. It was
yeah.
dysfunctional. Yeah. So you ask about silence, and I agree with you that Nordic people are not great at talking about, they'd rather be quiet than talking about what's going on. And I think it has to
You
do
literally
with,
have to pull words out of them, even
I think
now.
it's because they're a country of neighbors. Everybody that wants to know your business or are in your business. So you always have, like in Denmark 100 years ago, windows facing the street actually had this little mirror turned inward so that if you were sitting inside, you could see people walking by on the street.
Mm.
I don't know if that makes sense, if you can picture it. But anyway,
Yes, so that you know who went and who came and what
yeah,
time and
yeah, exactly. And then in terms of silence, to me, there are two types of silence: healthy and unhealthy silence. So unhealthy silence is what you mentioned, where people don't know how to deal with their emotions, or too many things are taboo and they don't want to address it, so
Mm.
they turn silent. And of course, with certain toxic people, it's used as a manipulation or a
Mm.
punitive tool. But there's also a healthy silence. And that is when you connect to yourself, when you're present with yourself, or, in the company of others. And I really think that's the antidote to much of the issues today. We need to become present and silent with ourselves and others. And you can actually be in a room full of people and speaking and still have an inner silence.
Hmm.
It's a state of being.
I know people like that. I'm not like that, but I know people like that. I will speak. But I know people who are silent, and when they're silent, I'm looking at them and I'm thinking, I know you're thinking something really deep. I wish you just spoke, and they're not, and that's when you have to really like grab them and be like, please say what you're thinking. And yeah, I have I drink the same water of the younger generation today. I think and it's coming out of my mouth before I have time to think about it. But you
But
know,
that's not a bad thing.
I hope so because so far, I haven't put my foot in my mouth, but one day I think I will, but I don't think I'll learn from it. It's just nature. Now, I want to go back to healing. Um, from what you just said about, culture and everything else. And we often use healing as a homecoming, and your book, in the title, a long road home. What does home mean to you now, specifically, compared to when, you were younger and you were thinking you're going to go back to Toronto, or you had these ambitions of what home meant to you? And very importantly, from your book, what is the difference between belonging somewhere and calling that home, and just staying somewhere and calling that home? Because I learned the difference from you. So I want you to share that. Yes, I learned the difference because I love words. I took a course with a very famous linguist, and it was then that I learned the power of meaning. You know, I often use this myself in terms of words. I never use the word change in an activism protocol. So I don't say be the change you want to see or things like that. I say be the progress, be the improvement, because I want you to move in a directional way that has a compass to it. Change doesn't necessarily have compass. If I say to you, Annette, let's go make change tomorrow, that could
It can be
mean we
bad
could
change.
trash Copenhagen. Yeah, we could trash Copenhagen and break all the window fronts of the stores. That's change, or we can plant trees. Both are change. You can, it's just, now, how are you using that word? It's really hard to rein that word in and make everybody understand that you're using it in that context. But if I say, let's go improve the world tomorrow, it's really hard to put into that context breaking the windows. So it gives you this direction of understanding what you're trying to say, and it becomes living within you. That word starts to live with you. And belonging and staying became two very different things. So that's why I specifically, put this question in there, because I thought it was really, really a cool learning.
Thank you. So, belonging is an internal state. For much of my life, I never felt in harmony with where I was. I was split between three countries, Denmark, Canada, and the US, always longing for people or places in the other countries. So never really at peace. And that has changed after I became soul happy. So home to me is really a return to yourself. When you're homesick, you're actually longing for yourself. Like I know this person, she's moved in the past 20 years, at least every other year, thinking the next home is going to be, paradise. And it never is, because she's looking for herself. So to come home is an internal state where you find, you connect to yourself. And I call it connect to your soul, because that's the part of you that's not your mind. It's much bigger. It's connected to divinity, the universe, whatever word you want to use for that great big force in the world. And when you connect that way, it's such an anchor, because there's so much trust. When you learn to connect to yourself, you suddenly feel you can trust life in a new way, because you have yourself on your side, and you also have that big force, God, creation, whatever you want to call it. And it's hard. It may be hard to understand until you have experienced it, but that's what home is. Really feeling good in your own skin, knowing that you're connected to something much bigger than your image. And I would say that separation, not being home with yourself, is actually hell. Hell is not die. Hell is right here when we're disconnected, separate. And that's the pandemic in the world, disconnection. So staying, you're also asking about staying. Staying to me is a physical. That's physical. That's outside of you. I'm staying in Portugal. I'm staying in Australia. I'm not staying here very, very long. That's different from being home. at home.
I really like that distinction. And I was kind of waiting for you to hint on the spiritual because um, I notice a lot of what you say, a lot of the way you draw on whatever information it is that you build on through your writing, through narrating your life and the course of events and everything, continuously touches on the spiritual. But there is no flat out position on the spiritual from you.
I'll give you
Um,
a position.
yes, that's what I want to hear because if for example, if a priest wrote your book, exactly your book, right? They would refer to a very religious kind of connotation all around the book in terms of that spiritual angle. If somebody who is really mindful and spiritually connected cosmically and is going into flow states and everything else and feels the universe connect to them in that way, they will explain that in that way. I find for whatever reason it was, you you hint that it's all a spiritual growth and evolution and process and the connection really coming together, but there isn't a blueprint or a chapter or anything about where this all comes from, where it started, how it developed, who you are in that spirituality. Did you go to church one day and an epiphany came? Were you walking down the street and somehow you just boom, what happened?
So how I got in touch with spirituality, and I think spirituality is a worn word. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
it's misunderstood and it's considered woo woo, etc. But it's the word that we have, and I don't have a different word to describe my experiences and what I am. But when I got sick, I was just a young person, career-minded, new mother. I had no interest in spirituality,
Mm-hmm.
but I was in extreme physical pain after a botched colonoscopy that caused an anal fissure. For several times a day, I was almost at the point of fainting. So I would when that happened, I would run to the bathtub and make a bath with hot, steamy water and add lavender oil to it. And I would soak in that. And that was a very sensory experience. It eased the pain, but all these, my senses were, stimulated by all those baths. And in that, when I soaked in that, it just happened. I started connecting to myself, and I started connecting to wisdom I didn't even know I harbored. And this is where it all came together, where I started seeing, okay, I'm in a life I hate. I've achieved the American dream, but I hate this life. So all of this came together. Where I connected to myself. And that's why I keep emphasizing the point that we have to connect to ourselves. Otherwise, we are connected to our image on social media. That's essentially, most people are walking around being only connected to their image, not to their essence. And it's when we connect to our essence, we call that spiritual because it's an energetic connection. It's not physical. But that's how my spirituality was awakened. And then I started reading because I had to heal myself and I had to find, what's heads and tails. I also do want to say that I probably also came into this life with a lot of this wisdom, carrying this wisdom, but not knowing it. And then I had my grandmother was just, no one would ever call her spiritual, but she was. And her ways influenced me, like, she went against doctors in the 50s when her son, they wanted to amputate his leg. And she said, no, there has to be another way. And it turned out there was. So I think I also was influenced by her. I had that foundation. But
Mm.
really, we need to connect in whatever way. My way is not your way, but this is how we heal ourselves and heal the world. We have to get in touch with ourselves.
Repeatedly, I find when I ask people this question of what is their spirituality, and like you say, it's the word that we have, it's the word that we use. It just encompasses the whole field when we talk. So it's simplifying it. But I ask people, and generally, I find we go up this kind of social hierarchy, kind of like Maslow's, pyramid and all of that. And sometimes, we start reaching up, like you just said, you hit the American dream, and that's when you realize you're unhappy. Until you hit that, you would have never realized you're unhappy because you're so focused on hitting that. That's exactly what happened to me. It's exactly what happened to so many people who I have had in your seat or spoken with casually. What changed? What triggered? What happened? And I'm always waiting for this moment where they say, oh, I was walking and I fainted. And then, the angel Gabriel came and he gave me a message. Never have I heard that story. It's always been, I reached what I thought was God at the time, the wealth, the whatever it is they're selling to us publicly. And I reached it. I could go into any store and buy whatever I want. And I thought that was it. That was the religious experience, right? And at the moment that I was able to make that purchase, I realized I'm empty. So it's very Socratic to me in the sense that Socrates gained knowledge, and he reached a level where nobody had the knowledge he had, only to learn that he knew nothing. Right? And so the American dream is the same. You get to this fulfillment level of you have everything, only to find out that it's everything you should have never actually tried to get in the first place. And I went through that. You went through that. So many people, like I said, went through that. Yet it seems, unfortunately, that you can't share that with people to the extent of giving them that information early on, because sometimes, I'm in a room of people and I explain to them my backstory and everything else, and I tell them don't. And they say, it's easy for you to say because you did this and this and this. I want to do these things yet. Those are experiences for me. And then, you're stuck. You can't explain to them that that's not an experience. It means nothing. In 20 years, you won't even remember that experience, but you will remember this experience. That's where you want to focus from now. And it's just so difficult to get that going. And I find on the flip side, I find people who, from an early age, the only thing that I'm able to touch on and learn from this and kind of help other people to learn is some people from a very early age are tapped into compassion and gratitude. And they have this experience of compassion and gratitude, which builds their soul. They become happy. They become naturally happy. And you don't find this so much in the big metropolitan cities, but go out into the farmlands of countries and go up into the villages and, into places that, as a New Yorker or a Torontonian, you don't expect to live there. You go to these places, suddenly you find this calm and peace and happiness and just flow that's so beautiful. And you're like, oh, I'd love to live here. And that's why a lot of these, Wall Street type people like myself used to seek escapes in those places because that's what we really wanted. But the drug was over here, and
I,
so.
I agree with you, Ali, and I've noticed a lot of, even like in poor areas, also underdeveloped areas in the world, they have nothing, but often they are happier than we are. And I
Mhm.
think because they're not attached to all the material wealth, when you're able to surrender to a greater force, there's such peace in that. And that's what, when we are concerned with material wealth, we are very ego driven, very attached. And like I recall being in a hospital with a couple of African American Baptist ladies, and both of them had sons that were disasters, drugs and crack and all of that. And yet I admired these two women because they were able to surrender their life in the hands of that greater force and be at peace. They were truly happy. They were singing in the hospital beds, etc.
Mm-hmm.
I held so much admiration for their approach to life. And I think they are able to surrender whatever happens. They leave it up to a greater force. Of course, they're still going to take responsibility, but
Yes.
there's a greater force directing them. And then on the other hand, you have someone, your old circle. They're so attached to the new car, the new house, the new trip, gold, whatever. And I think it's in that attachment that's the difference.
Because it's a never satisfactory attachment. It's a and it's not just unsatisfactory. You never reach a peak because there's always another. But on top of it, there's an economic factor. There's the law of diminishing returns that kind of creeps in on you as well. I tell people, you give a child one scoop of ice cream, they're going to love that scoop. You give them a second scoop, they're going to love it too, because they can handle a second scoop, and they're going to be shocked. They're like, oh my God, this is my birthday. Like, how am I so blessed to have a second scoop? And they're going to really savor it. You give them a third scoop, they'll still eat it because they're a child. They're not going to say no. But now they start worrying. They start saying, like, is my parent gone crazy? Like, what are they, like, is this poison? Like, what's happening? There's some kind of like disconnect happening right there, right? This isn't normal. You give them the fourth scoop. Now they don't even want to have it, but they're like, when am I ever going to have ice cream again? I don't know. Like, let me just eat it. They will eat that fourth and the fifth until they puke, right? Because they don't have that understanding. But notice, from scoop 1 to scoop 5, it wasn't higher excitement like how you would expect. It's actually dropping like that. And I always tell people, your first supercar, oh my God, you get home and you actually start polishing the tires. That's how crazy it is. I got to a point where I was driving a supercar through the snow because it's all-wheel drive, and I had winter tires on it. Like, I went from fantasizing about that car to driving it as my winter car. So it goes like this. When you get to that point, it's unbelievable how sad your life becomes from not even recognizing your own privilege, not even recognizing who you've turned into. You just deteriorate into this horrible state of disconnect. And that's where your spirituality and your soul kind of shreds away from you.
Well, there is no soul. There is no
at that point, it's disconnected. Now, I want to ask you about staying here in this spiritual space. Practices, rituals. What anchors you? Because you went through a process, and to be happy, to be where you are, to be connected, to have a soul, to strengthen your connection. What do you do?
Writing is that's my passion. But rituals actually trigger me, that word. Speaking of words.
Okay. I didn't mean it like cult rituals.
No. I want to explain, because I have done a lot of rituals in the past because I trained shamanically. There's a lot of rituals in that world where you honor the season, you honor solstice, etc.
Right.
But when you think of it, rituals are mind-based because you have to, think of exact steps. And I just can't any longer. So when I first started writing, I intently created this ritual before each writing session, because I know creativity doesn't come from the mind. It's something you can tap into. And that was my intent. And it worked. I do feel that part of my book is channeled. But a few years ago, it felt so restrictive. So I stopped doing it. And yet, as long as I enter my office in the right frame of heart and mind, meaning no forcing, it happens. So rituals, I'm still honoring the season and the solstice and all of that, but it's more intuitive. Do I feel like doing this now? Then I'm doing it. It's not because it's so in my rituals book. But the things that do nurture me is the sun. And of course, Danes love the sun because it's dark here most of half the year. But in recent times, this is spiritual. I'm going to turn spiritual now. In recent times, it has also, I have realized there's another reason why I adore the sun. And in 19, I couldn't understand why one day I would feel great and then the next day I would have some weird symptoms and then they'd go away. And that's how I started looking into the sun and the role that it plays. And in the spiritual community, it's now, there's consensus now that it's much more than this body of light. It's actually a body of consciousness that sends light codes into our DNA. And this is, it took me a while to wrap my head around this, but the way I do things is I listen to a theory and then I observe and check it with my own system. So the sun is actually a huge body of consciousness that's affecting us in ways we don't even yet fully understand. So I have to have a lot of sun. And then nature. As a child, I was very connected to nature. I was so happy back then. And then as I abandoned myself, in the relationship with my ex and all of that, I abandoned nature. And now I have connected with it again. And I know I could never live in a big city because nature is so huge. Yeah. And actually I think this is important to share. A couple of years ago, I went to a lecture with a quantum physicist. And he says, if you're in a bad mood, go to the water, go to the ocean. You don't even have to go out on the ocean, just on the beach. And he said, pardon me?
Thank you for saying that.
Okay. So, after heavy rainfall, there's all these negative there's this special smell in the air. And that's because the rainfall has produced negative ions that cleans the air and is very healthy for all creatures. And by the ocean, there are high levels of negative ions, which affect not only our physical body, but also our nervous system. So if you have the opportunity, I'm not just talking to you, Allie, but whoever is listening, if you're in a bad mood, go to the ocean if you can. And I tested it out and it works.
Which is why you want to move somewhere close to the ocean.
Right. And
going to our earlier conversation.
Yeah. And then
and it's funny because you picked, well, you didn't pick, but I mean, Denmark, Toronto, Canada, New York, USA, those are not the kind of places where it's not the trajectory to being you today. It is the opposite. But see, I made those same, mistakes and moves, very, very parallel to you. And I find this is what fascinates me about, this part of what I do in with the podcast and why I love doing it, with everything else going on in Compassiviste. I love doing the podcasts because I feel like I meet mirrors of myself so often, not just like, it's just coincidental that you and I were both in Toronto, but if it wasn't Toronto, it was New York. If it wasn't New York, it was Chicago. If it wasn't Chicago, it was London. It was some similar kind of setting. And then that person reaches a point where, like me, like others, now they're close to a body of water, preferably an ocean. And you naturally gravitate towards that place that we're all going. And I think to myself, that's church. That is what a church is.
That's church.
It is not the building. It is not the mosque, the synagogue, the church, the temple. I have been mistaken to go into those buildings and kneeling and praying and begging and all of those things and the rituals that we speak of. Those aren't it. But the real rituals and the real church is that which is provided to us through nature, with a capital N. You can replace that nature word for God. You can replace it for universe. That makes sense. That theory and that equation makes sense. But
yes, nature is my church, and Mother Earth is my true mother.
Yes. That's why, when you look at the word compassiviste, when I put that word together, I was looking for a word for compassionate activist, and I couldn't find one word for it. and activist wasn't sounding right to me because like today's activist is just so much different. And so I made the word, right? And it should have stopped at compassivist with a T. But the more I saw my connection, the more I understood my God, and the more I understood my world and my spirituality, the more I realized it's feminine, because Mother Nature is what guides me. And because she guides me, and because of my background in French and Arabic and other languages that have a feminine and masculine in the language, I put that E at the end of compassivist, so that everybody who is a compassivist or learns of compassivist or joins or becomes part of this, formation of liberating themselves in a sense to that, spiritual space of compassion, understand that it comes through Mother Nature. It comes through that feminine force, which brings the love that we're all seeking, and like I say, I speak with you. I've never spoken with you about compassivist. I've never spoken with you about any of this journey. And you replicate essentially my experience and many other people's experiences to come to that point. And I think this is where true religion is. It's in connecting to the cosmos on that stardust level, on that level of understanding yourself, kind of like a Spinozic understanding of the universe as you being part of it, you being an extension of that whole God.
Right.
Very fascinating.
Yeah.
I'm in a total agreement with you, and just yeah.
Now, what does soul happy mean to you? Because I want people not to mistake what it could mean. And you know why? I'll tell you this. When your press kit first sat with me, I looked at it and I was like, oh, this is cute. Because, soul happy, it's very uplifting. It's very, on a shallow level, it's very nice, right? It wasn't until, because I do this all the time. I actually I look into, this comes from my world before, from my, fund world. I don't judge a book by its cover, because you miss on all the good deals, because sometimes people have amazing ideas, amazing stories, amazing stuff, but the cover is not doing it justice, right? So I thought, not just for you, but always, I read a little bit into the story to see what's going on. And as I read, it became more fascinating. So I stayed, and then I kind of realized where this word comes from, what it could mean, soul happy with a hyphen in it. And like, there's just so much going on in that. It made sense. But unfortunately, in the fast-paced world of today, people are just going to kind of jumble a definition for themselves of what this could mean, and what the story of the book or the storyline is, and just make that story for themselves and not even read the book and continue and pretend they knew what's going on there. So I really want you to share with the audience what soul happy means.
I'd love to do that. So the short answer is to live authentically. Soul happy means to live authentically, but of course there's way more to it than that. So I purposely didn't define it in the book. It was an active choice. What I have discovered is that when you read a book, you can read it with your mind, or you can read it with your heart. When you read with your mind, you're using analysis and judgment. You're paying attention to punctuation, and does what happened on page 95 flow with the rest of the book. And when you read with your heart, it's an experience, it's an energy. You're not as judgmental. You're not judgmental because you're experiencing it. And my intention was that I wanted readers to get soul happy through Netta's experience, first as a child and then later on when I became an adult. And I also realized it's going to land differently depending on where people are, whether they read with their minds or their hearts. But I didn't want to define it, but I'm going to explain it now. So soul happy is our birthright. It's a state that we can reclaim. And young kids inhabit this place. And this is why they're so dear to us, because they're full of curiosity and wonder. They love to explore. They also don't have an image. They're not they're not concerned about how the world perceives them. They are who they are, much like an ocean wave or a seagull. They're just their nature. They are also deeply connected to the realm that they came from. And that connection usually severs around 6 years of age. Of course, there are exceptions. But that's the place that young kids inhabit. And we can reclaim it as an active choice. And it doesn't mean, and this is the point I really want to emphasize, being soul happy doesn't mean that you walk around in 24/7 bliss. Not at all. It means that you're so connected to yourself. And science shows that our eye only perceives less than 1% of reality. So there's not plus 99% of reality that we're not perceiving that's energetic. And that's part of the world that our soul comes from. So when you're connected, when you're soul happy, you're connected to your soul and also, God or the divinity or whatever you call it. So that's such a powerful place to inhabit. I feel as if I have a new OS installed, because I can handle life much differently. I still go through all the human experiences as anybody else, ups and downs and in-betweens, but I have a new way to be in the world. Because I know, even though my world's falling apart, perhaps, I know all is well. Because when you have that connection, all is well, even when it looks like it isn't. And I also want to say there are three choices I've made to keep this connection. And that is, even before I got sick, I made this decision that I would never turn bitter. People in my family, there are a couple of bitter examples, and I didn't want to become that. And, when you have tough experiences, that's like anybody can turn bitter, but it's a choice if you let that experience color you. And then the other two things that are active choices is I cultivate, not in a forced way, just when the opportunity presents itself, curiosity and laughter, because both are bridges to the soul. So yeah, again, soul happy doesn't mean that it's not this cute, so positive. No, it just means you have a new way, a better way to handle life and be.
And it comes from, I think, being connected to me means having surety of something. Because in my growth, I have learned having faith is dangerous. Because to me, when you have faith in something, it means there was no way for you to connect to it. There was no way for you to validate it. But somehow you're going to hold on to a possibility that this is the actual truth. It's like having faith in winning the lottery. You play, you have faith you're going to win. Some people are so delusional that they'll make plans for Monday, playing a lottery on a Saturday because they're going to win. That's faith, right? You have no knowledge, no assurance, no verification, no validation, nothing of the connection between you and Monday. It is based on this Saturday lottery ticket that is, aloof, with a 60 million in one chance that you may win, 1 in 60 million chance that you may win. But hey, let's make plans and pick the color of the car and the house that we want and all of these things, right? Over the weekend. And some crazy people do that. That's faith. Religion is the same thing. You have faith without any kind of connection or assurity. When you have a real meeting with God, when you have a real connection with God, and I'll use the word God, it's fine, to encompass that whole energy, that whole field, you no longer have faith. I don't have faith in God. I know God. There's a difference.
Exactly.
Because I know God, I'm never scared.
Exactly.
Everything's fine. The world's falling apart. Ali, there's a flood coming. It's okay. Because I know.
Also, when you have that connection and you start trusting it, and this sounds crazy to some people, but there's a light behind you And it's actually not just behind you. It goes ahead of you and creates opportunities.
Mhm.
And then it's up to you to take them
Yeah.
up. But when you trust your light, it really
Right.
moves oceans. It
Yeah,
moves.
and I think a lot of religion points to that too. It's just been hijacked by, capitalism, but you go to the Bible, and you will find so many places in the Bible and in other religious texts and books and the Quran and poetry from, all parts of the world. Even, you go to a lot of the indigenous community cultures and kind of socio-religious cultures and stuff, you will find there's so much connection between ask and you shall receive kind of ideas, and today it's taken out of context, it's destroyed, it's become a different story, but it's for the capitalist machine of whether it's the Catholic Church or whatever it is. But the true essence of that really comes to light. Like, I've become so much more religious as a human after what I say meeting God, because now I know there is a truth and there is a reality of my connection to that truth, and I'm a part of that. And if I could just filter through all of these, rituals and cults and businesses and the big mall of organized religion, I can actually be happy. I can be productive. I can reach my purpose. I can know why the hell I'm here, other than being in hell, because you're in hell until you have that meeting. You're in hell until you actually see the light that you're talking about. But once you do that, there is no devil in the world that can take you to hell. And that's really what it means, that, whether biblically or Quranically, or, just taking the two largest religions in the world, we have 60% of the population following these two religions. And, in both religions, God says, there are those of my people who have met me that you cannot take to the devil, right? And so the story there really is, those who've seen the light, there's nothing you can do to them. They're blessed. And I think, but then in both religions, God also says it's a tiny little minority, right? And unfortunately, the majority is stuck in this, um, disconnection, which happens, the hell, which is capitalism, right? I mean, that's what hell really is. It's not capitalism as a system of economic order and stuff, but that capitalist mindset of falling into that devilish kind of pursuit. So
Consumerism.
yeah, the overconsumption, the consumers, just that whole life that is hell. So um, beautiful explanation and beautiful way of expressing soul happy. And one of the philosophers that really touched me is Spinoza throughout my life. And he was the one who actually said the highest human value is joy. And you touch on that too. When you were explaining soul happy, you touch on the laughter and the joy and everything else as well. And it's kind of achieving that. And what that really means, it's not in the new purse or the new vacation. It's in the being of joy, which is a very different experience, because you would have to replicate that new purse every 15 to 20 seconds for you to maintain that state of joy. And it's impossible because, one, there aren't that many purses. Two, you get tired because there are people who are tired from those experiences. So
And
that
then the
means
neighbor, has the
yeah,
match on, and then
you
then you
see
need
what
to
I
go.
mean? And then it becomes sad, or you don't get the one that you wanted in the color that you wanted, and then you break down. And so, these problems happen. And this is a superficial example, but it's true on any level that you want to think about it. So being in joy is very different than achieving joy. You can achieve joy in so many ways every day, but it's never lasting. There's no permanence to it. But that living up here when everybody's here, that's the being in joy. Last
Now,
question for you.
actually, Ali, and you
Go.
may, I have a question for you, and you may not
Sure.
want to answer it, but not, you said you met God. So this has me wonder, where in your journey was that, when you given up your fortune, or
Oh
after? Or,
yeah, long after, because, and I'm not shy of speaking about it at all, because I like people learning about these things. So generally, people have heard that I've given away my fortune and everything else, charitably, which is not the case. I continuously express to people, and I've said it on many podcasts that I've appeared on and I've written about it too. I didn't give my money away out of charity. I gave my money away out of addiction. So I had a lot of friends being in the world that I was who were addicted. I used to take them to rehab. My home is a rehab center today, and so, but well, my former home in Toronto has turned into a rehab center. But essentially, I recognize the patterns of addiction because I used to sit with doctors, with my best friends, and going through the processes and everything else. I knew the lingo, I knew everything. You think I was, I've been through it before. And when I wanted out of my life, I realized that I am only using my money in the same ego and power in another industry. So I came out of finance and I went into charity, kind of bossing my way around and, stepping over people and being, I am so and so because I have this much money. And I realized for me to really change and make an impact and become happy and find myself, I need to let go of my addiction. And my addiction was money. So I gave my money away, not because, people need help and people need charity, I'm going to be, a hero. No, I gave it away because I was going to die if I kept that money. It's
Right.
like
So you had
having,
that
yeah,
experience. Yeah.
think of it this way. I had a whole kilo of cocaine and I was a cocaine addict. And it was either snorting that kilo of cocaine and definitely dying or throwing it out the window. Now, throwing it out the window wouldn't be a good idea because other people would get addicted. I have to give that kilo somewhere where they can do something good with it, right? And so I found a place that could do something good with it, and I gave them that drug, and I said, here you go, do good with it. Thank you very much, I'm out. So I was strong enough to do that. After doing that, I actually became homeless for a while. And I went around, traveled in my homelessness. It was through the homelessness and the experiences that I had in those homeless moments that I was able to start reaching that space of joy, that being of joy. And then slowly I started going deeper into what is the value of, this whole existence. Like you really have to think at this really psychotic level, much bigger than you can even understand or explain to yourself. And it has to make sense at some point to you. Otherwise, you'll never know. And so slowly answering those questions to myself and having those moments and the answers that I'm getting from myself, putting those questions out, were not from me anymore. They weren't me answering those questions. It wasn't Ali saying, what do you think you're here for? And then Ali saying, well, I think, no, it wasn't. It was something more powerful, more kind of compassionate and supportive and non-judgmental and caring that said, how about this? How about you look into this? How about I direct you over here? How about, what about you read this book? It may be interesting, kind of, in subtle ways. Like I would be walking somewhere and a book would pop up to me that would, the cover was interesting. I was like, why am I looking at this book? Why does it seem so interesting? Buy it, read it. And you're like, wow, okay, now I'm at a different level.
So this is what I'm talking about, the light where
this is God to me.
Yeah.
God is holding my hand and literally walking me down this street instead of this street because there's a purpose that I should go down this street, right? And so that 5 years I went through 5 years of this before Compassiviste happened. I went through 5 whole years of being guided and guided and guided and guided until things came into a full scope understanding for me. And now I truly...
5 years of detox.
Yeah, literally 5 years of rehab and detox and being clean and wearing my badge and all of that. But, it really came to the point where now I know. I don't believe, I don't have faith, I don't... it's none of that. It's when I speak with people, I speak with confirmation and an attitude that's like, I already know. I'm not trying to convince you. I'm not trying to explain it to you. I know my life because I've met God in that sense, and I don't think it's arrogant. I don't think it's a recreation of Moses on the Mount meeting God kind of scenario. I'm not competing with that. I'm not creating a cult. I don't need that. It's the God that is really making me calm keeping my heart rate low, steady, happy, joyful, excited. Like all of the good things are happening all at once for me, all at once for me. Even when I get sick physically, it's happy, it's good. Right now, I had a cold. I still am recovering from a cold, but I'm so excited being here, having this lovely conversation that the cold doesn't matter. It doesn't take me down. It doesn't ruin my energy. It doesn't stop me from talking. We've been at this for an hour and, over an hour, and my voice is not gone because I'm in joy. I am living in joy. Nothing can take that away.
I'm really glad you are sharing this, Ali, because listening to your story from other podcasts, I had been wondering about this, like where you had your meeting with the divine, with God. And it makes sense, 5 years of searching, and in that
Yeah, it was literally a growth, and it's just like that. It was so I grew up in a I grew up religious actually all my life, in the sense of my communities, and even when I moved to Toronto to go to university, it just so happens the things I was studying had a larger Jewish population in that school in those courses. So most of my friends were Jewish, and most of them were Hasidic Jewish. And so I started learning for the first time in my life about Jewish culture and life and everything else. And then I was like, they're so similar to, for example, Muslims, or, the Catholics that I grew up with, and all of that, in so many ways. And so they became very rationalized for me. And so there was always this concept of God in my life, right, growing up. But then I kind of lost that connection from a ritual perspective with wealth. As wealth came in, it kind of, this God blanketed that God. And then when the toxicity of wealth and the, that life, the consumerism and all of that, and the competition and whatnot, kind of did its thing, and it was over for me. I had no excitement for it. That God kind of crept back in, because I thought this is maybe where I messed up. But then I realized, no, that was an oppression. That was like a patriarchal oppression of its own that was living within me as well. I have to let go of that as well to find God. And so I had to let go of this whole, yes, I had to let go of God. I had to let go of walking into a church or a mosque and saying, I have sinned. I had to let go of that to be able to find God, because that God is not my God, is not my forgiving God. So it took that's why it took so long, because I had to just detox so much, unlearn so much to be where I am.
Beautiful story, Ali. Really.
Thank you.
You're not going to find, if you ever write a book, you're not going to have any comparative titles, because it's one of a kind.
Oh, thank you. You know what? It's not. All of us are living that. There's so you don't understand. There's so many people in the world who are living those experiences.
Yes, but
We're
not
just
that.
disconnected.
Yes, the disconnection, but the wealth that you had achieved and the power you had achieved, you don't, and then walking away and turning into the ultimate compassionate person.
Right, but
That story
you
you're
know
not
what?
going to find elsewhere.
Yes, you are.
No.
Yes, you are. There are so many people who do that, and you know what? It's the I think it's the story of life. I mean, when you think about some of the historic stories that we have, right? Whether the religious stories like Jesus, or the cultural religious stories like Noah and the Ark and all of those things. You think about Moses, right? I mean, the guy killed someone. He grew up as a prince, ran away, came back, saved an entire world, because back then that was the entire world, right? Split the sea, moved them over to another part of the world. And now, myth, true, we're not going to discuss that. The point is not to discuss whether that happened or didn't, but the stories that we were telling ourselves to give ourselves that power to reach these levels of compassion were those stories. It was stories of these grander than life humans who showed extreme compassion after falling, or after, being a fallen angel and all of those. So I think it's in our nature to correct. It's in our DNA to correct. To we have that measuring tool to correct. It's just like construction. If you find really, really good builders, you will notice them once in a while. They're building a house or something. You'll notice them. They're doing something. You're like, what are you doing? I thought you finished. No, I looked at it and it wasn't perfectly on. So they're recorrecting. And we just do this. We keep correcting.
Yeah, we're remembering because we come from.
Yes.
And it's just when life turns really sour.
Right. And when we're derailing, we keep trying to keep that train back on the rail before it breaks off completely, right? And so there's these really small little shifts that doesn't really matter. The cabin just, bounces a bit and it goes back on rail. It's not a big deal. But then there's these really bad ones that, you topple over. Sometimes it comes off the rail and falls back on. You're lucky, like, oh my God, thank God it didn't go off the rail. But sometimes it goes off the rail and you go off the cliff and you die. I don't want to be there. It's easy for that to happen. Once you start rattling, it's easy for you to fall off the cliff. I don't want to fall off the cliff. So
yes, where I agree with you that, our stories are versions of not just ours, but everyone's stories, versions of each other. But my point is, Ali, that your story has a magnitude that, as far as I'm concerned, outdoes many other stories. It's special in that way,
It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. It should just be somehow an awakening for people to understand that joy and abundance is actually given to us by nature. I tell people, yes, Walmart, the Waltons became, billionaires because of Walmart, but they didn't make the apple and the orange and the grape that they sell there. That was on Earth when we got there. These foods were made for us, and our digestive systems were designed to digest those foods into energy. That's why we don't eat rock, because rock was not meant for that. This was meant to, who meant that? Explain to me who meant that, right? If you tell me that's a freak accident, that's not good for me, because there's way too many flavors of this freak accident that's good and digestible for me. So I can't buy that answer, And so I think to myself, the abundance was there. There's enough food to feed everybody. There shouldn't be 20,000 people dying every day of famine. Every day. It's a real statistic. The abundance is there, but it's the human, kind of miscoordination of that abundance intentionally that created what we have today. So
another form of separation.
Yeah. And to me, it's not the magnitude or anything like that. It's just, if we could just all sit for a second and say, yes, from tomorrow, I'm going to wake up and I'm going to find my path, and I'm going to, make my train move with as little friction as possible. That is how joy grows, right? When you have zero friction, you're in heaven. Like when Buddha talks of enlightenment, or Jesus talks of the Father, and Muhammad talks of the heaven, whatever those religions are preaching, I think reaching that point of what they're preaching is when there's no friction on your train. When your wheels are running on the rail and there's no friction, that is almost physically impossible. So doing that is heaven. Now, the closer you are to no friction, the closer you are to that state of heaven, to me. And so all I'm trying to do is to make sure my cabin isn't bouncing around. And then you've got these other people whose cabins are literally going off the rails like that. And that's a lot of friction, because every time it hits back, it just sparks of fire going off, right? And that's the hellfire to me, metaphorically speaking. But we just need to kind of calm ourselves and bring ourselves down and all kind of go in that flow together. It'll be such a beautiful experience. This planet, this world, this life, it'll just be so beautiful. But it's hard to tell people not to chase the American dream. It's hard. And I think sometimes it takes a catastrophe for it to change, A lot of societies, a lot of civilizations have changed only when catastrophe happened. And that's, again, going back to those historic stories, Greek mythologies and others. And it's always that big flood. It's always that big, disaster that kind of shifts people into a new light.
Well, I have a couple of experiences from New York where there's 9/11, and then there was
Yeah.
Sandy, which is a storm
Mhm.
in the middle of the winter that left us without power for 2 or 3 weeks. And I think about those two incidents because it brought out the best in people. In,
Yes.
people connected. This is when life is so raw and tender and vulnerable. This is where we deeply connect.
Compassion peaks.
Yeah, yes, and we find new ways of being after a catastrophe.
Hmm.
So, yeah, war has a different purpose sometimes.
I think I'm just happy that this happened for me because I know at the time when I I know at the time when all of this happened for me, it could have gone very, very differently. Very, very. I was at a point in my life where it was a real fork in my life. I was either gonna have to go full out and just shut myself completely, forget everything, and just fight for that status, fight for the billionaire status, which is a whole living goal in our world today. It's this pedestal that we have created for ourselves, and it's a real pedestal because things change in the world for you when you hit those markers. Whether it's a certain amount of followers on social media or a certain amount of accolades in acting or sports or a certain amount of money. When you hit certain milestones, it's like if you're a tennis player and you win Wimbledon, your life's different after that. It
You,
doesn't
you
matter.
gain
Yeah,
clout, right? You gain
yeah,
clout.
your life becomes different, right? And if you make $1 billion, your life becomes different. And if there's certain things, and so I had to make that decision of doing that, knowing fully conscious of this understanding that I'm never going to be happy. Never. I'm going to have very happy experiences. I'm going to have really amazing experiences that 99.99% of the living world and the world that has gone before us have never had experienced. So it's great. But I'd have to connect moments of misery between these highs. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought this is exactly like my friends, who I would take to rehab because they would have these amazing moments of highs and fun and partying and enjoyment and excitement and pictures and videos of this beautiful moment. And then what you don't see is the 22 hours between those 2 hours in the day that looks like that. Do I want to live that? And I got too scared of living that. And so I think I chickened out. I chickened out and by chickening out, I got to where I am. But you know what? There's also a privilege involved because the more I talk about the story, the more um, truthful I bring out a lot more layers. There is a level of comfort you have when you have that kind of money, and then you decide to walk away or walk around the city without a penny in your pocket because somehow your confidence, your aura, your just your control of society stays with you. I was completely broke, not a penny in my hand or my name, and I would still very comfortably, in the early days before I let go of everything, I still had the passion of, oh my god, this brand made their new watch, I have to see it, or this new car came out, I have to go and see it, because I still lived partly in that world, disconnecting slowly. In all my brokenness, I would walk into a store that wouldn't let the population in, and they just open the door for me, and I'd walk in, and I would command respect because that was me. So there was a lot of privilege and comfort and confidence and arrogance in my shift. And sometimes I think to myself, if you don't have, like you said, that extreme that I came from, can you really be so comfortable in making that shift? Can you be just a regular person having a regular life and then deciding you're going to make the shifts that impact your life and then go ahead and make those shifts and not be drastic and not and be able to manage them and be able to stay with it and to grow through it. And because there were many times I was going to, fall back into my addiction. I mean, I would, like you said, September 11 and Hurricane Sandy, I'll tell you something. When we trade, a lot of the times we pray for a disaster.
I know.
You buy gold, right? You buy
Yeah.
gold. What are you waiting for? You're waiting for a disaster, because why else does gold spike? I mean, there's got to be a war, there's got to be some hurricane, something, some tsunami, something's got to kill somebody for people to panic for gold to go up. Gold doesn't go up because we're having a festival this weekend or it's the World Cup finals, it's going to be fun. It doesn't go up for those things. It goes up because something really scary happened. So you buy gold in what anticipation? In prayers that somebody is going to kill somebody, right? And so you're living in that world. And you foresee that often. So during those 5 years, there were times where I was even hungry. And I would actually say, I know this disaster is going to happen. Or I know this war is going to break out. Should I just buy gold a little bit? Just convince somebody that I know, let's buy gold and we'll split the profits. I'll give you the info, you make the trade. And I stopped myself
Did you
because
ever feel bad doing that? Did you?
when I was doing it, no, because I didn't know. I didn't, you see what I mean? I didn't know that layer of thinking. It didn't exist. It was just, you put in a few $1,000,000 into this trade, you make a few 100,000 out of it. And wow, you're a genius, because that's the marker of being genius, right? I mean, you tell somebody tells you I make about, $75,000 a day. You're like, whoa, I make that in a year. And I'm considered, upper middle class. So they look up to you like, wow. They don't ask you how or what had to happen for you to make this money. They don't ask you, oh, you made the money. Like, you know, a person they made a film about, he went and he bet against the whole United States' housing economy crashing. He became a multi-billionaire. He has his own fund and all of those things. And they made a film about him, books about him. They gave him, awards and all of those things. And they watch him closely and monitor what he's going to do and his next move and everything else. And I'm thinking to myself, did anybody ever think that this person sat there and thought about how many people in the United States are going to become homeless? How many kids are going to go through the trauma of being kicked out of their home, living in a car or in their grandparents' home or in a shelter until, their parents revive the situation? And this person is awarded and rewarded and recognized because they called that bet. That's really horrible that we are those humans. But I could never have thought that when I was in that world. When I was in that world, I would have looked at this person and say, when can I shake this person's hand? Oh my God, I have a picture with this person, right? Those are the dangers. But when you reach soul happy, you don't live in danger anymore. You don't harm. Part of being in joy is you don't harm, not intentionally at least.
Right. Exactly.
You don't wake up in the morning thinking or intending to harm. But when you're not in that space, doesn't matter how many Rolexes you're going to buy that day, you are harmful in your amassment of wealth. You know you're harmful, but you do it. And you won't do it any other way, because even in places where harm exists, parallel and kind of, adjacent to doing good, we still choose to harm consciously. You look at the medical field, there are, doctors who won't treat or operate or do anything with a person who can't afford the treatment before getting treated. So it's like, I will only do the good if I get paid. So I will consciously put you in harm, because you not getting treated is harming you. I'm the person who can treat you, but without the exchange of money, I can't do this. So I'm okay with harming you. We do this consciously every single day around the world. It's not just in the developing world. It happens in the United States too. So,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
yeah. So you're not living in your soul happy space. You're not living, and it becomes even more unfortunate for me when you are living in privilege. Privilege to me should be an easier door to soul happy, because you have the metrics to allow you not to be at the basic level of not dying. A lot of people, yes, poorer places or smaller towns or villages and stuff, they seem to be happier and everything else. You're right. They're not in that, consumption struggle and everything else. But at the same time, when you go into the desperation levels of like the people that I told you, 20,000 people dying on a daily basis of famine, there's no soul happy place there.
No,
There,
if
they
you
need
get
food.
desperate, right,
Yeah,
you'll do anything, right?
right? So privilege reduces the desperation and it increases your capacity, your channeling to soul happy, because you have the capacity to do that if you're not blinding yourself with the things that you shouldn't be involved. So instead of going on that yoga retreat to Scottsdale, Arizona that cost $25,000 for the weekend, do some real soul searching with that 25,000 and the weekend you're going to free up. You will reach soul happy very quickly. But you have to really be able to be honest with yourself. And I think one thing that's, commendable about your story and why we're having this discussion is I recognize that you were truthful with yourself. I recognize that you were okay with accepting your mistakes and walking away from them. You're okay with saying, and you, in the beginning of this podcast, you said it. You said, I don't want people playing the victim card, and I want them to take accountability of their decisions of being in these narcissistic relationships, which reflects on your own decision. You said, you know what? I put myself through this. It was wrong. I shouldn't have. I should have done this, this, and this, and been more careful, and I should have been here. I'm going to do the right thing. And so you took yourself, you built your soul happy. You didn't just sleep and wake up in the morning and somebody gave it to you. And so
No, you earn it. You have to earn
yes,
it.
you earn it, and for you to go out there and earn it is very powerful. You have a family, you have your physical ailment. You don't have $10 million to sit on and be like, okay, I don't care about money. I'm just going to focus on this. Um, you're living, as wealthy as you may be. You're living a kind of regular upper middle class or lower upper class lifestyle that still has some things you have to be responsible. I'm pretty sure you still check your credit card bill and stuff like that. So, at that level, you have these responsibilities, and you have this other higher moral, ethical responsibility to yourself to be honest with yourself, and you choose to do that, which is the commendable part, because that's what people need to learn from people like you. How do I choose to be proactive in my own soul happy? Stop with the I'm going to save the world conversations. Stop with the I'm going to donate to the children in Africa to do this, because it's not. If those donations would have helped, we would have been in heaven by now, because we've been giving those donations for at least 200 years now. It's not helping. But if we start at a place where we ourselves fix ourselves, our actions will start fixing the world, because we won't be part of that. We won't be part of that destruction and
That's
harm.
how you create planetary
Yes,
harmony, is by
yes,
healing
exactly.
yourself, because that's going to ripple into your environment.
Exactly. Harmony comes from that, right? It comes from, I can't be a dictator imposing harmony. You know what I mean? Like it's like these regime changes, a dictator comes to power, imposes communism or whatever order they do, or, Hitler comes on board, and there's no harmony from that. Doesn't matter how you thought, what you believed, how you pushed your agenda forth. You cannot build harmony through that. But then if you allowed the people who really were trying to, you look in their surroundings and there's this harmonious state of their inner social space, and you let that ripple out into a larger community without disrupting that and instead encouraging it, you will start noticing this beautiful flow of growth happening, which is coming back to what you were saying. You don't want to live in big cities. Why? Because in big cities, you see that dictatorship kind of push outwards. And when you go into communal spaces like, little villages, you notice how there's this circular economy and health and friendship and protection, and there's almost no crime. Crimes that happen are, they're from moments of anger and mental issues and stuff like that. They're not really deep thought, you know, uh, Bernie Madoff situations. I mean, that's some serious calculation on a New York level. You cannot think like that when you're living, in the Algarve in Portugal. There's no space
Like
for you to think like that.
small
Yeah,
communities
small
take care
communities.
of themselves.
Yeah, they take care of themselves. They love each other. You see that harmony. And then as soon as it goes beyond their walls, it breaks because they don't have the power to push past that. But they have the power to hold that within them, which is why we love those beautiful places. Even nostalgically, you see so many wealthy people, they don't go to Rome anymore or to Milan. Where do they want to go? They want to go into the little towns of Italy, the coastal towns, and they want to go into the, 1600s homes and stuff like that. And they want to experience what those locals are and eat with them and go to, same thing, go to, Turkey or Greece and do the same things, these little villages and towns, and ride on horses in the little back alley streets. And why is your heart, your soul telling you to do these things? It's continuously trying to bring you back home.
Exactly.
But you're not listening because the drug is stronger. It's sitting there saying, you need your fix, come back, only one weekend. You go to Tuscany for one weekend, that's it. You come back Monday morning because the drug's waiting. That's really what got me to quit, because I had to tell that drug, I don't exist anymore. And the drug doesn't care about you. If you walk out, don't think that the world's going to break down. I walked out. My office changed hands the next morning. That's all it took. There's a new name there, new office, new phone number, new corporation. Nobody even knows I exist or don't know what happened to this guy. Nobody even asked. I never got an email from any of the people that I used to know on my building or floors. Hey, Ali, we don't see you here anymore. Did you retire? Like, not even the curiosity of asking me if I hit big and I retired. Maybe you made $1 billion deal and left. No. So, you see what I mean? It is. It's amazing. Last question for you. And this is one I ask everybody, so take your time. But I want a concise, short, even one-word answer, because I want to know what comes to your mind right as I ask this, okay? And then we can elaborate on it. So we're going to imagine you're the most powerful person on earth, not in dominance or dictatorship, but in moral influence. What is the first action you take to ignite a global shift toward planetary harmony? And you said those words before a minute ago, which is amazing because you speak my language. So what is the first action you take to guide
planetary harmony? I would revamp the schooling system. The kids are our seeds, the seeds for the future. I would revamp the schooling system and introduce compassion-based learning with a device that's called head-heart coherence.
Mm-hmm.
Kids and adults too, for that matter, but kids are the future. There are so many fear triggers you open the mail, you open the door, anything you open, there's a fear trigger. And that's keeping us from connecting to soul. And kids need to learn to differentiate between when they or someone else is coming from, fear is mind-based. Mm-hmm. And love, compassion comes from the heart. And the goal of head-heart coherence is for the two to be aligned so that when we act in the world, our heart values inform how we behave and think and act. Mm-hmm. That's called head-heart coherence. And kids need to learn this so that, because kids and young people today are so overwhelmed with fear and anxiety, and it's keeping them from connecting to themselves. So this head-heart coherence, I would introduce in the curriculum. And there's more to it too. I was trained as a Waldorf teacher, Rudolf Steiner, depending on where you are in the world. I didn't finish, but my daughter went to a Waldorf school for several years. So I'm familiar with the philosophy. And the Steiner schools are generally flawed. Many of them have deep flaws. I recognize that. But the philosophy itself, which came from Rudolf Steiner, is gold. It's compassion-based. It entails respect for all creatures. Mm-hmm. And kids are, nature is part of the curriculum so that kids connect to nature. And it's based on curiosity, exploration, individualized learning, etc. And it's a beautiful philosophy for that I think can help achieve planetary harmony with this head heart device. And of course, I can't give you specifics of how, that would be introduced, but kids need to learn the difference between coming from your head, fear-based, or coming from your heart with compassion, love, bliss, joy, all those values, because that will empower them. That will empower them to step away when someone's trying to trigger them with fear and, allow them to cultivate heart values. And then they'll go home and introduce it to their parents.
They definitely will. And you're absolutely right. And I love that you put it that way, because I really do believe that our education system formally is really purposed to the consumption machine, to preparing people to function within the world of supply and demand.
Absolutely.
Nothing beyond that.
Yeah.
And the problem with that is we're creating these highly specialized systems that create, that labor force. And I think one of the good things about AI and technology is that there will come a time when the force of this monster itself will kind of eat itself, in the sense that we will have to recreate our education system to allow people to live outside of enslaving them through education. So whether we do it consciously by following the people who are noticing this, like yourself, and saying, okay, we need to figure this out and we need to do something better for the kids, or if we need to, or if we wait until it forces us to do this through, the changing societal models in the workspace, it's going to happen. The difference is, if we do it consciously, we are bringing in a development of the kind that we want to see the future look like. The problem is we can't do that because the people in charge of deciding a better future don't know what a better future looks like, other than more money. And so I don't blame them. They don't know better. It's kind of like the forgive them for they don't know what they're doing situation. They just don't know better. You take some of the leading people in decision making in our society today, and the poor guys, they really don't know better than what they're doing. They're really doing the best that they can. They're not all as evil as society and fringe societies are making them to seem. Maybe Mark Zuckerberg isn't an evil character. Maybe Jeff Bezos isn't. They just don't know, the poor guys. They just don't know better, and they're so blinded that even their giving and their charities and stuff is done. And, going back to experience, it's because I experienced a tiny portion of that. When I gave to charity, when I did, it was more for the show and the taxes than it was for the purpose. It was for the charity organization to thank me and shed tears in front of me for what I've done, and the grandeur of it all, and for the attention and all those other things, and people in society and in your circles saying, "Oh, Ali's such an amazing. He's always giving to people. I mean, if everybody was like Ali, if only everybody was like Ali, right? Those things are good for business too. I mean, some of it is marketing, and on the other side, taxes." So you don't know any better. How many times did Ali go to the hospital, to the sick kids hospital, or to that orphanage in South America or other places to see what's going on, to see how Ali can actually bring in some force to change this systemically, just like I did with money? No care. I just gave for the reasons that I was taught to give. And so I never blame the poor people who are in power, because they just don't know better. this is the best that they can do. The best that they can do is to amass money because that's the direction they're led on. So sometimes I feel like the world needs to, Mother Nature needs to kind of like do a little rattle for things to fall into place. And I think that rattle here is happening through technology. Technology is creating a world in which the redundancy of a human's existence itself is becoming clear. Like at this point, I'm not surprised if people are saying whoever's not a billionaire should just be executed. Because what's their purpose? Because, machines can do everything. What is the purpose of having a doctor? Because, now you can get all sorts of surgeries. In 20 years, you can get all your surgeries by a machine that's much better than any physician's hands. What's the point of a doctor? Let's get rid of all of them. What's the point of this? What's the point? The only point person will be the billionaire who's amassing the fortune from owning this power, right? So you'll start getting to that point. And then that's when you start thinking, well, there must be a reason we're here. There must be a purpose for life. And I think that's when the illumination starts to happen. And that catastrophe forces it.
That's that question that you and I and others who have become soul heavy, that's that question we asked ourselves on our journey and which brought us to where we are. Like, what's the purpose?
And I think, people get to that when they have the comfort of getting to that, not when they are forced to that. You cannot go in front of, the education district board and have placards and say, we need better education. And then they're looking out the window and calling the police on the protesters. That's not going to make a better education system. It's going to happen when we all kind of understand why or what this is purpose to or where it's going. And I think we're just at that place where a portion of the population has awakened to seeing this, and the grand majority haven't yet. And so when you put those two together, you create this friction of misunderstanding. And with a little bit more time, kind of like Noah's Ark, Noah got some epiphany that the flood's coming. He built the ark. People mocked him. But by the time they saw the flood coming, they understood why this ark was there. They all went to the ark. The ark had purpose. You see, it took 10 seconds for everybody to agree with Noah. But it took 1,000 years of Noah's life to explain to people that this is happening. Nobody listened. 10 seconds of a drop of water, everybody's running to the ark. Even the animals are coming, right? So I think in those terms, right? I think to myself, with what language am I going to approach these school systems that are thinking about profit? Because, you mentioned Waldorf, Montessori, these are all models designed by compassion. If you think about them.
Okay, so this is my point I was trying to get to, Ali, is they're designed with compassion in mind, but they're still
hijacked by corporation.
They still have a strong economic interest, and this is why they're flawed.
But the economic interest didn't happen at its origin. It happened at the hijack. So somebody came, just like McDonald's. McDonald's was two brothers thinking, okay, this is a really cool system to serve people fast so that, they can have their burgers quickly and they can enjoy life and all of those things. Some guy rolls by and is like, ooh, I see the money in this. Alas, we have McDonald's. It wasn't purposed for this because those two brothers could have done McDonald's franchise all around the world. They weren't thinking of it. They were just thinking of satisfying their community with fast serving, perfect burgers every time. Just their community. That's it. It took a capitalist to come in and say, I see the money. Right? And so same thing, Waldorf. It took a capitalist to come and say, I see the money. Let me take this over to my part of town. Right? And then it all got ruined because first profit, then everything else. It's kind of like these funds I see today that call themselves social investment and all sorts of weird names they attach to themselves. And I tell myself, if I brought you the cure to cancer right now, and I said it has to be free and you're going to lose your $10 million fund funding this, would you? No, you wouldn't. You need profit because it doesn't matter how good social cause it is. If it doesn't have profit, I can't fund it because you see what I mean? So we need everybody to have cancer and to be at their dying breaths for those people to say, okay, I guess we'll better part with the 10 million because soon there'll be no point to this 10 million. That's when it makes sense to them. And then they'll say, okay, here you go. And then even then they may be thinking, let's get this cure going, regenerate health, and then we'll go back and make our 10 million again. Even then it may not leave their minds. So, but at least we try, and that's where I think this is going. So, but yeah, amazing answer. Thank you for bringing it back to the children and to understanding that it's the future that we're looking towards and not the past, and definitely not the current, because the current is in a great mess, but there is hope for the future. Now, I'm really impressed by the alignment when I speak with people like you, and from the choice of words to just so much of your life and your story and your realizations and your observations and the changes and the shifts and the way you express whatever you want to call it, God or whatever. It reinforces my knowledge. It's kind of like, imagine a meeting of, I don't know, a few scientists, 1,000 years ago, and each has made a discovery in one part of the world, and they just so happen to meet somewhere, and all three of them bring their papers out, and they have the same calculations, the same results, the same everything. Like, wow, there's no way you thought of this like the same way I thought of this. It must now 100% be true. Even if I was at 99.99, now I feel 100%, right? The more I
But you know
speak with
what?
people, the
That
more
is,
I feel that way.
and in a way, I feel that that's what we are. We have arrived at the same conclusion, different journeys. But what you're talking about with the scientist is really the web of life. So one change can occur on an island in the Pacific, and that same place can occur in a seemingly disconnected part of the world, but we are connected by a web of life.
Yes.
And these changes happen with synchronicity because we are connected. So more and more people will wake up to soul happy, I believe, what I call soul happy, because we are connected and the train has started rolling.
It has started rolling.
Yeah.
It has
The soul
started
happy
rolling.
train.
Yes. And I think we are recognizing that because we are kind of boarding that train right now. But if you look back into history, you could read books literally 500 years ago and you'll say, wow, this person was on the train, or this person was the conductor of the train, and it was 500 years ago. So I don't know so much if it's a temporal issue that a lot of people say we're so there right now, like society's awakening as a whole, or any of that, or if it's just our recognition because we are living in this moment and we are thinking, this is that great moment that's happening because we're part of it and we want to feel that way. But regardless of any of all of that, what I know for a fact is there is a tendency through all the drama, through all the dark energy, through all of that, towards the light. And I think, like you said, it's a natural part of our life. Just like plants. You put a plant anywhere and it'll either grow straight or sideways or do turns and twists. Whatever it is doing it to reach the light in the
Right.
best
It's
way that it can.
heliocentric.
Yeah, and
Heliocentric.
so we are going there. We are just going there as society. It's just that humans, we're not as intelligent as plants or other animals to find the shortest path there, right? We go like this and try to get there. But eventually, we will get there because, we're probably the most ignorant life form there is, but in terms of conscious choice making. So yeah, hopefully we do get there.
I
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I trust that we will. I have no doubt.
Oh, I trust we will. I trust we will too, because it's there. If I didn't know what I know, I wouldn't believe that we can get there because there wouldn't be a there. But the fact that I know what I know and it is that, universe that I know that we're going to get there, because that is the only universe that is real. The rest is just clouds. It's just fog. That's all it is. Anette Nilsson, thank you for joining us on Compassiviste Dialogues and for opening your life so bravely in Soul Happy. Your story reminds us that healing is not just recovery. It's actually, a form of rebirth. That's what I call what happened to me. I tell people, I don't know when I was born. I don't know if I was born on my birthday or, almost a decade ago or 5 years ago. Like, when was it that I was actually really born, right? And truth telling coming from you and experiencing it myself, but really being reinforced through your story, your narrative, that's the act of liberation. That's where it all starts. It all starts with truth telling, and that the journey inward can become a pathway toward compassion for the world. And that is where you find, the heaven that Annette expresses, basically. The heaven and the hell, that's where the heaven is. It's in that soul happy place. The deep alignment of courage and vulnerabilities and transformation to get yourself to that space. And that is why, you become a natural compassiviste in my eyes, not because I named that or the organization, but just because that is the nature of everybody who reaches this space of what you call soul happy. I call them compassivistes because they understand that is what life is. Life is an activation of compassion to reach harmony. And that transformation to reach that space that's called, or, that being that's called soul happy, that's what the compassivist does. Wakes up in the morning and tries to reach that place at some point, some night in their life, and they're like, I reached, and then they take that deep breath. To our audience, please subscribe to Compassiviste Dialogues, share this episode so I can bring you more amazing people like Annette. Explore the links below for Soul Happy. Get the book. It's a cool read. And read about the author, connect with the author, reach out to her, and follow on social media. So you get more cool news about her book, her other books. She actually used to write children's books. I said this in the beginning, so take a look at that. We're here to help the world together, and we're here to make progress in the world together. I'm Ali Horiat.